I want to first begin by thanking Jane Schaefer for sponsoring my talk in memory of her late husband, Butler Schaefer. Butler was one of my closest friends, and he's a great libertarian philosopher. And he and I used to talk for hours, exchanging puns. He's a great master of puns. So thank you, Jane, for sponsoring my talk. I think all of us know here that taxation is theft. The government takes part of what you earn and gives it to other people. If that isn't theft, what is theft? We can imagine, suppose someone who is not the state just comes up to you and takes money from you and gives it to other people. Wouldn't it be obvious that that's theft? So there are some people who would say, well, that is theft if a private person to do that, but it isn't theft if the government does it. These positions aren't consistent, but evidently those people who say that it's all right for the government to take money from you, and that isn't theft, but if a private person does it, it is theft. Evidently, they agree with Oscar Wilde that consistency is the last refuge of the unimaginative. Now, I'd like to discuss with you today some arguments that philosophers have given to justify taxation and show you how to answer them. Some of these arguments will seem very odd to you, but you should remember there's no position that's so odd that some philosopher hasn't taken it. An example of this, there was a paper published in the 1970s by the philosopher Peter Unger, who's a very well-regarded philosopher, under the title, which had the title, "I Do Not Exist." One must admit that isn't a very promising beginning. Now, one of the arguments that I'll be giving in defense of taxation, showing that taxation is not theft, is from the most influential political and social philosopher of the past century, John Rawls. What Rawls says is that we start off with equality of income as the default position. So we're starting off, everybody is equal. We start off. However, he recognizes that if everybody had the same income, this wouldn't benefit poor people because people are motivated by incentives. So if you allow people to earn more than other people, this will help the worst off class in society. So he says, if you insisted on saying that everybody was equal, then this would be in effect cutting off your nose to spite your face. You'd be saying, well, it's even though the poor people would benefit by allowing some to have higher incomes than others, still we want to insist on equality. And that wouldn't make much sense, although, as you will suspect, there are some philosophers who have said, yes, that's even though it would hurt the poor to insist on equality, we should still do that. Now, so what Rawls says is that all the inequalities we allow have to be to the advantage of the worst off class in society. Now, suppose, this is what he calls this the difference principle. So supposing somebody objects to that and says, look, supposing somebody says, well, I'm very talented, I'm able to earn much more than other people. Why should my income be limited to what turns out to be, what is limited to what helps the poor the most? Why shouldn't I be able to get the full benefits of my superior abilities? So Rawls answers this by saying, you don't deserve to benefit from your superior abilities. He doesn't deny that some people are much more talented than others, but he says you don't deserve to benefit from these inequalities. And why not? Well, he says, as an example, suppose we say Aaron Judge earns millions of dollars because he's an extremely talented baseball player. But according to Rawls, his abilities don't stem from any special virtues on his part. He was just lucky that by some combination of heredity and the environment, he ended up with superior skills. So he's saying, look, you can't say that Judge couldn't say, if he were inclined to say this, the government shouldn't tax me because people are paying me money because I'm such a great baseball player. He would say, Rawls would say, look, you don't deserve your superior abilities. You just happen to get them. Now, I think Rawls has ignored something that should be obvious, and I think it's obvious to those of us who are here. It's that people have a natural right to what they earn. Even if Rawls is right, and I don't think he is, that people don't deserve their natural talent, it doesn't follow that the government can take away part of what you earn and give it to the poor. If you choose to help the poor, you're free to do so, but it's up to you. The best defense of natural rights, if you want to get the argument for this, is in Murray Rothbard's book, great book, The Ethics of Liberty. So if you haven't already read this book, I would urge you to read it. You can download it for free from the Mises Institute page. There may be no such thing as a free lunch, but there are free downloads. I'd now like to turn to another argument to justify taxation and show you how to answer it. This is found in a book by Liam Murphy and Thomas Nagel called The Myth of Ownership. Murphy is a well-known legal philosopher, and Nagel is one of the greatest living analytic philosophers. I should say Nagel in other areas has influenced me. One of the two philosophers influenced me the most in other areas, but I disagree with him about taxation. Now, you might guess that Murphy and Nagel will respond along conventional leftist lines by a denial that property rights are absolute. You might expect them to say, well, you're entitled to some of your income, but not all of them. But they adopt a much more radical stance. They say you aren't giving away anything at all to the government when you pay taxes. So you're not giving up anything because you own only what the law says you do. They're very direct on this point, and I'd like to quote, here's what they say. If there is a dominant theme that runs through our discussion, it is this. Private property is a legal convention defined in part by the tax system. Therefore, the tax system cannot be evaluated by looking at its impact on private property, conceived as something that has independent existence and validity. Taxes must be evaluated as part of the overall system of property rights they help to create. The conventional nature of property rights is both perfectly obvious and remarkably easy to forget. We cannot start by taking as given some initial allocation of possessions, what people own, and what is theirs prior to government interference. So you see what they're saying? They say we shouldn't say people have certain property rights because you only find out what your property rights are after the government has decided what property rights you have. So you can't say, I'm entitled to my pre-tax income because you don't know what your pre-tax income is until the government has told you what it is. Now, I think we can see what's wrong with this by an analogy. Suppose the government banned free speech, and then someone objects. People say, "Oh, well, this is violating my rights. I have a natural right to free speech." It wouldn't be a good reply to this to say free speech is a legal category and you have no independent liberty of speech apart from what a particular legal system grants you. So you have no right to say the government is taking away your free speech rights. So I think we can see that argument is obviously wrong. So we can see that the opponents of taxation are not guilty of any mistake, contrary to what Nagel and Murphy are suggesting them that they have. Nagel and Murphy say that people have no property rights except what the government ought to recognize. why is this supposed to be so obvious? It seems to be Murphy and Nagel are begging the question against those of us who say we do have we have property, we do have property rights. So they just say, well, they're assuming we don't have property rights. One can hardly say it's a good argument for something just to assume the truth of the position you want to argue for. You could prove anything by that, by taking your conclusion and say, well, this is an obvious premise that doesn't seem like it would work. Now, I want to suggest, though, that there's a way to take this argument, the Murphy and Nagel argument, in which it would be it wouldn't damage our view that taxation is theft very much. And this would hold, suppose, as some people are, imagine many of you are in this room, hold this view that a strictly limited state is justified. They're in the terms that my late friend Sam Conkin coined, they're minarchists rather than anarchists. So those people would say that the state is justified in taxing people, but only to the extent it can take, just to the extent it's needed to provide for defense and justice. So it's strictly limited in those functions. So on this other way of taking the proposal, the argument would just be saying, you don't know what your income you have until the government says what the amount it's taking in taxes is. So it's in this view that you'd hold almost all of what you make would be yours by right, and the government couldn't take it away, but you'd be limited. You couldn't say all of your income is due to the government. I mean, is owed to the government just this very limited amount that it needs to perform its legitimate functions. Now, you might think, well, that doesn't sound like a plausible interpretation of what Nagel and Murphy are saying, but one point I think shows it is a plausible interpretation. It was one that Tom Nagel actually suggested to me that this is a way of taking this argument. So I think if we take it that way, we can defuse the argument. So I hope I've shown you how to combat some arguments in favor of taxation. And I'd like to conclude by thanking all the supporters here for your generous donations to the Mises Institute. Thank you.